Joining us now, Democratic Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. He is a retired combat pilot and NASA astronaut and serves on 5 different Senate committees, including Armed Services and the Joint Economic Committee. Senator Kelly, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's start with the issue of immigration, an issue that, of course, very important in your state of Arizona, perceived by some as perhaps the vice president's political weakness. She's trying to turn this issue on its head. She opened her rally last night talking about it. We just saw that ad. Tell us, though, what is the experience of those in your state about immigration, and what's the best path forward?
Well, Jonathan, let me start by saying thank you for having me on. And let's talk about those 2 ads for a second. The first one is typical Donald Trump. It was a bunch of lies and it was politics. The second ad was facts. Donald Trump and Senate Republicans, I mean, what did they do several months ago? We had a bipartisan bill that we negotiated faithfully with the administration, both sides of the aisle, and Donald Trump said that Senate Republicans can't vote for it. He wanted to talk about this issue instead of actually fix it. And J.D. Vance and other Republicans, they ran away from it. So Kamala Harris and the administration wants to fix this problem. She's worked on this problem, for 3.5 years, and it's a challenging problem. I mean, I represent a border state, but we have made progress, especially with what was put in place over the last several months. But I can't stress more that this is an issue that Donald Trump and Republicans just want to talk about. I mean, J.D. Vance is down here. I think he's in Arizona today, probably getting a photo op at the southern border. Kamala Harris is about solving problems. Donald Trump wants to drag us back a decade.
Senator Sam Stein here. You have been reported, I think you're aware, of being on the VP shortlist, of having received vetting materials. I have one quick question and then sort of a larger question. One, do you by any chance have plans to be in Philadelphia next Tuesday, just out of curiosity? And then 2, as we talk about the issues that are going to be litigated during this campaign, obviously immigration is going to be one, cost of living is going to be another. But I'm just sort of wondering, can you put on your political hat and sort of diagnose where you think the battlefield will be on a policy front for the next 3 months?
I mean, this is going to be a debate over what Donald Trump stands for and Kamala Harris stands for, fundamentally. I mean, Donald Trump, when he was president, gave huge tax cuts to billionaires. He weakened our alliances across the globe, and he tried to take away, and successfully took away, fundamental rights for women. Reproductive rights. Now he's talking about voting rights. I mean, he said just this week, if he's elected, we're not going to have to vote again. I think people know what that means. Kamala Harris wants to take us into the future. She wants to reduce the cost of education, health care. She wants to have a country where kids can grow up and live their own American dream. I mean, we can't have 4 more years of Donald Trump, especially with J.D. Vance, one heartbeat away from the presidency. I think we all know guys like this. I mean, what he stands for. He thinks people are worth more or less based on when they decide to start a family. And on reproductive rights, I mean, he wants to further restrict IVF. He would not vote for a bill to just try to help people start a family. So I think it's going to be about these fundamental issues. And it's pretty clear that we need to work really hard. I'm going to work as hard as I can between now and Election Day. We've got 97 days. We have to make sure that Kamala Harris is elected the next president of the United States.
And returning to that, Senator Sam was mentioning that the vice president's campaign outlined a travel schedule next week in which they say that Harris and whoever her running mate will be will appear at a number of stops, kicking off Tuesday in Philadelphia. So let's get an update there where you stand with this process. What sort of, you've been in contact with the Harris campaign. Have they said to you, we'd like you to be the choice?
Jonathan, I'm not going to get into any of that. I am going to be focused on making sure that Kamala is the next president. I'm going to work as hard as I can. My wife, Gabby Giffords, she's already working really hard on this. She has been. She was in Pennsylvania most of last week. She was in Michigan. She's going to be in other battleground states. I'm going to be traveling across the country tirelessly. Next week, my plans right now are to be in Arizona. Arizona is important not only for who's going to be in the White House, but also who's going to keep control of the United States Senate. We've got some really important elections in Arizona, and this election is going to come down to some really fundamental things. Do we want to take this country into the future with Kamala Harris as our leader, who has experience? She's an experienced prosecutor. Or do we want to be dragged back into the past with somebody who is now a convicted felon and a guy standing at his side that only has this job because he would do what Mike Pence wouldn't, and that's to overturn an election?
Mark, let's circle back to immigration for a minute. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people hear about the bipartisan bill that was negotiated and don't really understand how far that bill went to change the status quo. I mean, this was a bill that when I was in the Senate, I don't think that the Democratic Party ever would have embraced, because it really did a lot of things in terms of asylum seeking, in terms of being able to turn people away at the border. It really was, I would call it an aggressively center bill. It was not left. It was center, maybe even center right. And I think you need to explain to people how bold it was for Trump to say, no, we're not going to take the win, because I'd rather campaign on the issue. It's a little bit like I'm going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. It is just bull. And I know you can speak plainly to this because you live it in Arizona. You can't afford just to talk about it.
I do, Claire. I'm down at the border all the time, meeting with mayors, sheriffs, NGOs down there. It's a hard problem to solve. And by the way, this was, like you said, this was not meeting the Republicans on the 50-yard line. This was meeting them on the 10-yard line on their side of the field. We realize we've got to get operational control over the border. I realize this. Kamala Harris realizes this. And this legislation was going to do that. And our goal here was to get this legislation passed and then start working on comprehensive immigration reform. But this was stopped dead in its tracks by Donald Trump because he wanted to have this as an election issue. Like a lot of other Republicans, they don't actually want to solve this problem. They just want to talk about it. And that's why his running mate, J.D. Vance, is down at the border to take a picture. That's the only reason he's there. He should be back in Washington, trying to get this done. And I will tell you this, Claire, when Kamala Harris is the next president, we're going to continue to work on this. It's the right thing to do. At the same time, we're a country of immigrants, and we need comprehensive immigration reform. Dreamers are as American as my own two kids and deserve a pathway to citizenship. So where this is a complicated issue, one thing is pretty basic, and that's that we had an agreement. We had the votes. And then Donald Trump wakes up one morning and sees that he does not want this problem solved. So he told Senate Republicans that they were not allowed to vote for it. And not every one of them, but most of them, including J.D. Vance, they didn't walk away from this problem. They ran away from it. So I'm looking forward to seeing Kamala Harris in the White House. We can get back to doing the hard work. She's had a lot of success in the Northern Triangle. I was just in Mexico meeting with the president and the future president of Mexico. We talked about that. The work she did in Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala is now paying dividends. You combine that with the executive actions that Kamala Harris, President Biden took, we now have a much more stable situation. But what we need is strong bipartisan legislation. And Donald Trump made it very clear that he does not want that.
Senator, I appreciate that you don't want to get into the horse race around the vice presidential pick, but let me ask this a different way then. What do you think that Kamala Harris, given her weaknesses over the border or the attacks that she's going to take over the border from the Republicans, what do you think she needs in a vice president?
Caddy, I think that's going to be something that the vice president is going to have to figure out. I think she's got a lot of great choices out there. My focus is not on this, and this is not about me. I mean, this is about the future of our country. Having somebody in the White House, having Kamala Harris in the White House that is going to be focused on bringing down the cost of prescription drugs, making education more affordable child care, or Donald Trump, which I expect what we would see is more collateral damage to our alliances, taking away fundamental freedoms and rights. I mean, he's running with a guy, who says that in cases of rape and incest, two wrongs don't make a right. I have a hard time understanding what's wrong with a woman who has been raped deciding to terminate a pregnancy. I mean, this is a guy who says that when women get, unintended pregnancies, that it's an inconvenience. Inconvenience is when you get stuck in traffic on your way home from work. I mean, so the two of them together, I mean, Donald Trump is bad by himself. You combine him with a guy who was not picked to win an election. He was picked to overturn an election. That's a problem. And that's why I think every American needs to realize that they got to get out there. If they can, knock on doors, make phone calls, and more than anything, they need to vote and get their friends to vote.
So, Senator, this is your first interview like this since President Biden announced he would not be running for re-election. We appreciate you doing it here. I just want to get your thoughts about the president's decision, his legacy in office, and just what this means now for the Democratic Party.
Well, I served 25 years in the United States Navy, so I've served our country for a long time. And I would put President Biden's service to this country up against anybody's record. And what he did was very patriotic. And he realized that we've got to be best positioned to make sure that we do not get 4 years of Donald Trump with J.D. Vance. I mean, that is clear. We need to move this country forward. Kamala Harris is absolutely the right person to do this. She's an experienced prosecutor. She fights crime. My parents were both cops. I look at Kamala Harris as a cop, as a prosecutor, attorney general. On the other hand, you have a guy who's a convicted felon. And I have a granddaughter now. She's 3 years old. And I mean, just the example that Donald Trump sets for kids, growing up with this divisive politics, with lies, with, criminal actions. It is very concerning for me and for the future of our country. And that's why, again, we've got 97 days. I'm going to work as hard as I can. And my wife, Gabby Giffords, is as well, to make sure that Kamala is elected.